Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of our Professional Perspective series of What Cause Inspires You. I'm your host, Alicia Gupta, and today I have with me David McCullough. David was actually on our Voices podcast with Humanity Rising a while back, so I was able to speak with him then. But David, it's so nice to have you back.
It's great to be back, Alicia. Thank you for having me.
Of course. What Cause Inspires You is a podcast founded for students ages 13 to 21 to be able to share the service they're doing in their communities. We recently launched our Professional Perspective series in order for experts in their field to give insight to our youth about how to make a stronger impact and accelerate social justice movements. With the help of many, David founded the American Exchange Project after he finished graduate school. He has taught and coached baseball at Lincoln-Sudbury Regional High School and narrated historical tours of the Boston Harbor. He has a BA in American Studies from Yale and an MPhil in Economic and Social History from the University of Cambridge. The podcast is pre-recorded and will be published on Spotify and YouTube under Humanity Rising Voices. All right, ready, David?
Ready when you are, Alicia.
Perfect. So why don't you begin by telling us what AEP is?
Well, first off, thank you again for having me. It's really fun to be here again. So the American Exchange Project is a nonprofit that exists to bring together American high school students from different backgrounds to get to know each other. It's really that simple. So through our program, a student from the suburbs of Boston might get to know another student from rural Louisiana or rural Arkansas or the inner cities of Detroit or Seattle. And the whole idea is for young people who feel like they're growing up in what everyone says are bubbles to break the bubbles and get to know what life is like in their own country. And the way we loosely define it is that it's kind of a foreign exchange program applied to the United States, an internal exchange, domestic exchange, we like to call it, study abroad in your own country. And we also run an online program where kids get together on Zoom and chat, hang out. And we talk about anything from philosophy to politics to whether or not a hot dog is a sandwich, why the Red Sox are the greatest team in baseball. We cover a variety of topics, and we even talk about college, and we meet college students. So, Zoom and these other online group video call platforms have kind of presented us with a table at which any person in the world can sit at any given time. And for us in the business of trying to form a more perfect union here in the United States, this is a great opportunity. And so AEP is trying to utilize this new virtual space and this sort of what we feel is a unique idea that we've had of studying abroad in your own country to bring together people from different backgrounds and to show us that finally we have a heck of a lot more in common than we think.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that you mentioned union because I feel like that's such a big thing, especially in Humanity Rising, this whole concept of unity. But I can't tell you the amount of times that I've heard the word bubble. I live in the Bay Area, right? So everyone says that we're in this giant Bay Area bubble. Yeah. And as going to college, I've been talking to a bunch of people from Texas. And I can't tell you how different yet similar we are in the sense that we've all grown up in these separate bubbles, but we come together and we have so much more in common than you'd ever imagine. And it really comes down to the fact that we're both teenagers, we're both going to college, and we've shared similar experiences just in different places. And to be able to connect, especially with something like AEP, would be wonderful and really giving us a foundation to unify together. So that's amazing. Yeah.
A few years ago when you were still in high school then, huh?
Yep, exactly. So what was the inspiration for the American Exchange Project?
Sure. Well, it began for me. Well, it's hard to pinpoint an exact moment when anything begins. Suddenly, ideas, and especially I think in any entrepreneurial space, they begin a long time before you can actually put words to what they are. For me, AEP began when I was in college. It was the summer of 2016, the tumultuous summer of 2016. There was a certain election going on that I think people are still having headaches about to this day. Yeah. And I'd gotten a fellowship to basically do whatever I wanted as a research project. And it had bothered me that schools in impoverished communities were so often failing, at least by the classical definition of failing. And it also bothered me that in the reports and research reports I'd read and research I'd done, that I hadn't seen a lot of works that put the voices of students and teachers and administrators and certain parents at the center of their works, at the center of their narratives. And I had a lust for adventure and access to my mom's Mazda and just enough money in my pocket to stretch $1,000 over a couple months. And so I hit the road, and I went to 3 communities that could not have been more different than the Boston suburb that I grew up in. I was in a small town in South Texas called Cotulla. I was on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. It's the poorest area of America. If the Pine Ridge were its own country, its life expectancy would be the 2nd lowest in the world by actually just a few months.
Wow.
It's the 2nd lowest standard of living in the Western Hemisphere, and that's in our own country. I don't think many Americans know that, let alone young Americans know that today. And then after Pine Ridge, I went to a few of the more blighted neighborhoods of Cleveland, Slavic Village and Tough, and talked to everyone who was willing to lend an ear and, take 20 minutes. And I came back with great research. I'd learned a ton, felt a true devotion to a cause, and also made really, really good friends that had an impact on me, friends that people I'd never thought I'd have the chance to meet before, ranchers in South Texas, or an old medicine woman on the reservation, or the kid who liked to fix cars after high school, pastors in Cleveland. And those friendships just meant the world to me. And here I was, as educated as a 22-year-old can be, and yet it was unlettered folks from the faraway parts of the country, people who'd grown up totally different from me, that to me had provided the greatest educational experience of 4 years of college. Anyway, so I went off to grad school with that in my mind. I came back in the fall of 2018, wondering what I wanted to do with my life, full of ideas and facts and absolutely no trajectory whatsoever. And I went out to lunch with an old professor of mine who lives near me. I was back at home out here in the Boston suburbs. I went out to lunch with an old professor of mine, just hoping to pick his brain and catch up and see how things were doing. Right. And he is an economics correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, Paul Solomon. And Paul was telling me how we both had agreed that our country was kind of growing apart. Economic inequality, political polarization, the feelings of social isolation. You spoke about bubbles. Bubbles were rising in every corner. And if you think about each of those issues, we're talking about a division, a fissure, some type of Grand Canyon getting wider and wider in our society. And we noticed that as we traveled from both sides of the canyon, we were able to make great friends. And we were able to talk to people if you just focused on people as people, not a person as a political belief or a person as a specific income bracket that they might be in. And that maybe that spirit was some beginning of an answer to the problems our country was facing. We got to this point by about our 3rd round of dumplings at the Dumpling Daughter in Western Massachusetts. This is about hour 4 of the conversation. And we started having ideas and sat down and thought, what if we gave this a try? What if we tried to create an organization out of the idea of friend making? And that's where it began. He and I went and scratched our heads for a couple months and talked to a lot of people we knew who were on board with this idea, this spirit of trying to create an organization that could bring Americans back together again. We had no idea what it would look like. It's not that we had no idea what it would look like. We had a lot of bad ideas about what it would look like. And we were smart enough to pick out a bad idea when we saw one, but not necessarily humble enough to admit it right away. And so I was nursing all of these ideas that weren't going to work. And I was substitute teaching at the high school around the corner from my house, the high school I'd gone to, Lincoln-Sudbury. And one day the students, my students asked me what in the world a kid who'd gone to Yale was doing as a substitute teacher. And I said, okay, first off, it's a very hard economy and there's no shame in being any type of teacher at all. And then I said, actually, I'm also trying to start a nonprofit right now. And they then started picking my brain about the nonprofit. And I told them about all of these faraway parts of the United States that I'd been traveling to: Lake Charles, Louisiana, Kilgore, Texas, Cotulla, Texas, Davenport, Iowa, Pine Ridge, South Dakota. And suddenly they started hitting me with questions that were far above the intellectual level I'd seen evident among kids in the classroom that year. And I thought that was interesting. So I started telling them more. I started telling them about my trip. I started to tell them about the issues going on in our country. I was, picture me at the whiteboard drawing all sorts of graphs about inequality and economics and, capital gains and things like that, patrimonial capital. And the questions continued and continued and continued and ended on with this. They said, Mr. McCullough, how can we do this too? And that
They wanted a part of it.
they wanted to do it. They wanted a part of it. And that really made an impression on me. And I then pulled a few of them aside and said, let's have a focus group. I called in Paul and we started asking these kids these questions. And we said, why do you want to do something like this? And they said, well, we feel like we're growing up in a bubble. And that not only are we growing up in a bubble, but our lives are kind of on railroad tracks, the same sets of railroad tracks to futures. And that as we go down these tracks, this bubble will be surrounding us the whole way.
Yeah.
I've always said, if you grow up in a bubble, you can grow up in a bubble, but you won't grow very tall and you won't travel very far. And that, in my view, is no way to live. And so that also, flashed me to an interview I'd done, or a couple interviews I'd done on Pine Ridge in Allen, South Dakota. And Allen is the poorest town in America. It's $1,500 a year median per capita income. Wow. And when I asked folks there and living near and in and around Allen what their least favorite thing about living there was, they said, we feel like we're growing up in a bubble. And I thought, here are folks in a liberal, affluent town, 99% of these kids are off to college, saying that they're growing up in a bubble, which is the same thing as the people in the poorest town in America. Something must be up here. And so then we just thought, what if you switched? And that's where AEP began.
Wow.
I know that's a bit of a longer story than
No, but I mean, I love the fact that you mentioned so many things you mentioned, but to start off with friendship making, right? It's really stripping down all the prejudices, all the locations, the names, socioeconomic status, and really getting to the core of who are we, and how can we unite as one person based on our core values, our characters, really understanding someone else, even if they don't see eye to eye, trying to empathize with them. And I actually, over the summer of my freshman year of high school, I went to Cambridge to study a study abroad program. Oh, and I met, you went, University of Cambridge, yep. And I met one of my best friends, and she's actually from Greece. And there was a language barrier. Yeah. But I mean, it's really just, we got down to the core and we were such alike as inner people that we instantly became friends. But I find it really funny that you mentioned so many cities within the United States. And if we're streaming this to the public, guarantee you that a lot of people are not going to recognize those cities because they're not hotspots. They're not recognized. They might not be as affluent. They're not on people's radars, which is so unfortunate. But in that sense, we're all still living the same lives. So more people need to be aware of all the different societies out there, all the different demographics, which brings me to this point that maybe you can elaborate on. What issues do you think that we are facing as a society to begin with? And how has the American Exchange Project had an impact on the students?
Well, I mean, I think that, Alicia, there aren't enough hours in the night to talk about all society is facing right now. Yes. And there's certainly not enough battery on my computer. I believe the corrosion of some fundamental components of our democracy is the greatest issue in the world right now. And that's manifested by how our country has handled this pandemic relative to other countries in the world. We have, I believe, below 5% of the world's population, but over 25% of the world's COVID cases. Wow. That's a product of leadership. Yeah. I should say I believe that's a rough statistic. I know we have a disproportionate amount of the COVID cases in the world relative to population. I should have checked on that before this interview. But that is a byproduct of how our country is behaving right now. If you take a look at the electoral map from 2018, and you take a look at a map of who's wearing masks in the United States, it is incredible how similar they are.
I actually know exactly the maps that you were talking about. I have seen the statistic before. Yeah.
So in other words, polarization and division in this country is so bad that it not only influences the way we behave in the economy and the way we behave in the ballot or who we vote for in the ballot box, but it's also influenced how we handle our own health. Wow. The COVID-19 does the same thing to any set of lungs in the world. Pre-existing conditions obviously determine a lot about how you handle it, but a virus is a virus is a virus. It does one thing, right? And yet human beings, because of polarization, are handling it differently. Think about the magnitude of that statement. I mean, it's incredible. Half of We see on the news that it seems like half of the country thinks that this is the worst thing that's happened to the world in the last 20 years. Other half of the country thinks that it's a hoax. Yeah. Half of the country thinks that wearing a mask will save your life. I see congressmen in Washington saying that wearing a mask gave them the coronavirus. So we as a nation are bound by certain systems, namely those set out for us in the Constitution. It's our social contract. It's our answer to the great question of how we all live together. Mm-hmm. And we can't do that if we are so divided that truth and reality and facts don't matter.
Yeah.
AEP is coming in and reminding people. AEP is addressing an economic and political issue by pitching to people's hearts, by saying that you as a brother and you as a friend or a husband or a boyfriend or girlfriend or a son or a daughter matter much more than your political party, your socioeconomic standing. And we ought to come together on that. We ought to pitch to issues of the heart, not just issues of the moment. That we get in this really it's almost masochistic, but it's certainly this degenerative cycle of thinking that by proving the other side wrong, we're going to be better off. However, when I vote for a law in the ballot box, I'm not voting for the law that affects only me. I'm voting for the laws that affect everybody. I think we've really forgotten e pluribus unum in this country. I think we've forgotten that we're all in it together.
Yeah.
And you see it in our generation when an alarmingly low number of folks believe that it's essential to live in a democracy. When only 30% of young people in this country believe that the founding fathers need to be looked at as heroes, while another 30% say they need to be looked at as villains. We're really at odds with ourselves right now. We're in a real identity crisis, and it could have terrible effects. So I think those are the huge issues facing our society. I think the downfall of American democracy has international ramifications. I think that on the global economy, we could potentially fall as the hegemon and leave a vacuum that Russia or China will fill. I think that's a real possibility. I mean, the potential outcomes from this period are humongous, and a lot of it hinges on whether or not when Donald Trump loses an election, be it in 2020 or 2024, if he decides to cede power. But I mean, as a 26-year-old in my mother's attic working on a nonprofit, there's not a whole lot I can do about that. What we can do is start something at the grassroots level. What we can do is show that we as Americans are not necessarily as polarized as we think. Most of us are caught in the middle, bewildered, angry, and really feeling let down, and that we can come together on these facts. And it can begin with young people. AEP provides a solution by pitching to people, pitching to the heart, and fundamentally showing young people and hopefully old people eventually that we can talk to each other. And that's the beginning of something not just great again, but better than before.
That was great and very well put. You mentioned all of this together and my mind went straight to High School Musical. But actually this one scene.
Oh my God, me too. Joyful, what a hunk. Yeah. No.
Yeah, no, but there's this one scene and you have these different groups, right? Like the stereotypical, you have the basketball players and the cheerleaders, and then you have what we like to call nerds, and then the drama kids. But in that all in this together scene, they're literally all standing right next to each other, talking to one another, finding those similarities. And going back to a more serious note about AEP, I think stripping away actually politics and economics, AEP finds the similarities between students. And correct me if I'm wrong, but really allows them to connect with one another, regardless of our political situation, regardless of our economic status or what's going on in the economy. But how have you, in your personal experience, actually seen AEP change students' lives?
When a girl from Louisiana texts a girl from Wellesley, Massachusetts, or a girl from a very conservative oil town in Southwest Louisiana, texts a girl from a liberal, more privileged town in the suburbs of Boston, hey, what's your Amazon Prime Video login info? I really want to watch that video you were talking about. And then the girl from Wellesley responds and says, here it is. That's success. It's people treating each other as people. When you frame it, as you said, when you frame it as people talking to people, it's incredible how easy it is to talk to each other. And then you can bring yourself to talk to politics. I mean, really, the reason why the bubble statement mattered was because, I believe that our political beliefs are the product of our experiences. And our experiences are deeply shaped by the circumstances in which we've grown up. And this is especially true for young people, almost unanimously true for young people. And the communities in our country are becoming more and more socioeconomically homogeneous. And I believe as a consequence, politically homogeneous as well. And so you can locate pretty well where a person's coming from in their lives and what they're going to believe based on where they're from. Yeah. And so by addressing each other as people and these things we have in common, we can then come round to talk about politics. And we can talk about politics in a way that isn't, what do you believe? I think abortion is vital. You think it's murder. It's saying, where are you from? How have your experiences, how have the circumstances in which you're living, which I now know because we've been talking about them for 3 weeks, shape your experiences? And how from that experience have you come to believe this particular viewpoint you have? And I may still disagree with you, but I see that your life is different from mine and that's okay. And that you think what you think because of some things that happened to you, which therefore makes you a rational being and someone I can reason with. And then we can have a conversation. And then we can agree that maybe a girl who's been raped ought to be able to have an abortion. And isn't that progress? I mean, this happens maybe not, every day might not be factual, but certainly every week in the American Exchange Project with the students, the small group of students we're working with now. And it's my great hope that this can happen in the country at large. And it's a pretty simple framing. It begins with a smile and a sense of humor and a little self-deprecation. But that's how I see it happening in AEP. And I cannot wait, and I'm really bummed that COVID canceled it, but I cannot wait for these kids to meet each other. I mean, my students don't know how tall they are yet, how tall the other people on the call. They don't know. They don't know if their breath stinks or if it doesn't stink, or if, I don't know. Jake from Wellesley has terrible BO. And while Alana, is actually 5'11", who knew, right?
Yeah.
And I can't wait for that day to happen.
Wow. No, it's definitely taking these, what we call political concepts right now that shouldn't be political, but should be really a matter of human beings and human rights, and breaking it down to that level to be able to understand and once again empathize with each other. But I've been on podcasts. I've been hosting 2 to 3 podcasts a week for the past 2 to 3 months. And what I've seen is actually there's a recurring theme. It's connecting to the other person one-on-one on a very human level. I was on with Paul Schmitz of Shower Up Nashville the other week, and he said almost exactly what you're saying, except he was talking about homeless people in homeless shelters and the public. And he said it begins with a conversation. It begins with a smile. And it's funny, you're saying the exact same thing, but it's that principle, it's that theme, that it's really just approaching another as a human being versus a human being with all of these other characteristics attached to it, and breaking it down to that central level.
So many of the great thinkers and great conclusions of the great thought experiments of life come down to 2 final points: be smart and be nice. Yeah. That's really it.
All right, David, a few more questions before we wrap it up today. What can the young people do to help our democracy?
They can get involved. We can begin by voting. Right around 30% of young people voted in the 2018 midterm elections. That was an all-time high. 3 out of 10, we can do better than that. We can do a heck of a lot better than that. And we can't expect to make our voices heard. We can't expect change if we're not going to make our voices heard in the ballot box. And that's where young people can really win. And that's the first thing we do. The second thing we can do is, I think young people right now are really good at expressing their feelings and expressing their thoughts. And I think we're right on a lot of points. I think we're right on almost every point. We need to be a heck of a lot better at making substantial sacrifices to the early part of our professional lives to do something good for the world. There are a lot of professions in this country that do a lot of good. And it's too bad that the social rewards, social benefits they provide are not reflected in the economic reward of those professions. But as young people, I really think our applications ought to be going to public schools in need, ought to be going to the offices of social workers, ought to be going to public defending firms, and not necessarily Deloitte, Amazon, and Tesla. I think we really need to be better about doing something for our country, about broadening the definition of what national service is, and then taking years while we're young to do something for our country, to make some sacrifices. I think it's really time we do that. And I think it's time we do it not for how it's going to look on our Instagram pages or on our resumes, but for what it's going to do for the greater good.
Yeah.
For what it's going to do for other people.
And regardless of intention, I will say that I think my generation in particular has been doing an amazing job of actually taking that initiative and making change within their communities. And as a small aside, if you want to see those students who are making a change, you can look at our What Cause Inspires You podcast on Spotify and YouTube, where we feature all of them. But no, really, they've been doing an amazing job of just taking that first step, putting in time and effort to make that change within even their small community, and then later on growing it to be something nationwide, even sometimes global, which I think is amazing. But David, as a final question for those aspiring social entrepreneurs, what must we consider when formulating an organization that can create change?
First thing you need to consider is what matters most to you, what's in your heart. It's hard work, and the end is not defined, and no one's going to know if it's going to work or if it's going to go well. I mean, I've been at this for only a year. I can tell you I'm just as confused as anyone out there, and I have absolutely no idea how it's going to go. I know we got a great idea. I know what we do works. I know the kids who've done it have had a terrific time, but I don't know what the end's going to look like. I mean, I hope it's great. I'm certainly working as hard as we can to make that happen. But the first thing you have to do is you have to know what's in your heart. You got to believe in it. You really got to believe in it. And you got to believe that not only that what you're doing is right, but that the world can't live without it. Because it's a lot of early mornings and it's a lot of late nights, and it's for absolutely no money whatsoever. That's what matters most. The next thing you have to do is take away the passion and start being practical. Start thinking about what's actually going to create change in the world. I worry sometimes that the label of nonprofit takes away a fundamental reality of what we do, which is starting a business.
Yeah.
You know, we are a business that has a product, and that product needs to be treated the way any for-profit entity treats its own products as well. It's about marketing, it's about advertising, it's about product development, it's about research, it's about incremental scaling, it's about pivoting. These are all things one needs to understand, and so it's really a long way of saying learn. If you have an idea, if you have some passion in your heart, go to school, learn about it, talk to people about it. We spent just about a year, and if you include my trip, we spent 3 years researching the beginning of AEP, and we're still just out of our trial year. We've still just launched this program. So spend as much time learning as you can, which finally I think is the most important thing in any entrepreneurial endeavor, which is to be patient. Yeah. There's very much an organic pacing to these sorts of things, and that's a good thing. It's okay, but it does require you to stick to it and to be patient. But I think the most important thing for young people is to look inside themselves and say, what matters to me? And how willing am I to listen to what my heart's telling me to do? And I think if we all did that, then, not to end on an extraordinarily corny note, but I really think our country and even the world would be in a lot better of a place. And I think to do that, you need, especially, and I say this to my high school students as much as well, cultivate your heart. You go out, test things out, try it, explore, be confused. Don't be afraid of not knowing something. And take your questions out onto the road. And when you come back and when you know what you know, then run with it. Then run with it. It's about courage and convictions. I mean, you're innovators. My grandfather's a writer of history, and he wrote a book about the Wright brothers. And my girlfriend and I are listening to it on tape. We go off on the weekend and we go camping or up to the beach or something like that. And we're often on long car rides. And we've been listening to his book on tape. And the Wright brothers never married, didn't particularly have great friends. They didn't seem to want those sorts of things either. They were devoted to a cause. Now, to my friends and to my girlfriend, I'm not going to go down that road, nor do I recommend make that level of a sacrifice. But the point is to be taken just the same, which is to not be afraid of what your heart is telling itself to dive into, and to not be afraid to take a few licks, a few bumps, a few bruises, maybe even a broken nose when you take the plunge into what your heart is telling you to do. Follow it. I think that's finally what I tell young people to do if you want to make a difference in the world.
David, I hope that you become a writer as well, and write down all of these beautiful thoughts in your very poetic form. But no, really, that was beautiful. And for everyone out there, patience, learn, and passion. And don't forget to keep asking yourself what cause inspires you, and follow that cause. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. But that was amazing, David. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alicia. It was a lot of fun.
And you can always contact David at david@americanexchangeproject.org, or sign up for AEP on their website, www.americanexchangeproject.org.
And we're launching a new program in September, so be sure to sign up before then. You don't want to be late to the party.
Exactly. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Alicia.
Catch you next time.